Welcome to the Timco Retail Manager course. This course focuses on real-world application development. In this video, we're going to be handling what happens when a user does not have the permissions necessary to perform a task. Now, Patreon members, don't forget to head over to my Patreon site to get the source code. If you aren't a Patreon member and are interested in getting the source code for each Timco Retail Manager course video, head over and sign up at the $5 per month level or higher. Now, if you've been following along with this course since the start, you know that the goal is to develop a .NET framework application that can serve as an existing or legacy application so that we can learn how to upgrade to a .NET Core application. The schedule is now set, and as long as nothing unexpected comes up, there will be only 2 more videos after this one before the big upgrade. That tentatively schedules the upgrade for November 4th. I'm planning a few surprises and giveaways for the event, so you don't want to miss it. I may even be live when it launches. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel to get alerted when new videos are launched. Also, there'll be extra bonuses for mailing list members and Patreon members. The link to both of those is in the description. Okay, so let's move over to Visual Studio. Now, right now, everything works as it should, and we're kind of on the happy path, meaning the user we logged in as has permission to do all they need to do. But if we go look at the TRM Data Manager, go to Controllers, and go to Products, right now it says, hey, if you're a cashier, then you can get all of the products. Well, what if we weren't a cashier? Now, instead of deleting have permission. Before we said that basically anyone can sign up on our API right now. And we added those roles so that, yes, they can sign up, but they can't do anything. Just like you can sign up at Amazon and you can have your own shopping cart and you can buy stuff, but you can't manage Amazon's products. You're not an administrator, you're not a manager, you're just a consumer. Well, in the same way with our API, you can sign up, but then you couldn't go in and try to make purchases because we require a cashier to do that, at least for right now. So let's talk through what we're going to do. I'm going to leave this user as, I'm going to leave this open. I'm going to leave this user as not a manager and leave this as manager. That way we do have that error so we can test it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say, let's wrap this in a try catch. That's a good first start. So let's go snippet, surround with try, and we'll catch the exception. And we're not going to throw it. But the question is, what do we do here? In fact, I'm going to put a breakpoint right there, and we're going to start the application again. And this time, it should be that it won't crash the application, but it hits this exception. If we look at the exception in the locals window, it says the message is unauthorized. It makes sense. And we hit continue, and our form comes up. There's no items in the list. That's not ideal either. Our user would ask us, where is the information? And that's not what we want. We want them to say, hey, you can't go to the sales page because you can't do anything on the sales page. So we want this page to close down, and we want to alert the user and say, something isn't right. You're not allowed to be here. You're unauthorized. And this is one of those questions that comes up a lot with especially MVVM in WPF. But even in WPF in general, the question is, well, how do I create a message box? So we're going to create a message box today. And it's not going to be, there is the, I believe it's system.windows.messagebox or something like that for WPF. We're not going to use that because that kind of breaks MVVM. Because MVVM, the controller, shouldn't be directly doing UI stuff. That's what the view does. But then you have to put the code in the code behind for the view, and that's not right. Instead, we need a MVVM-friendly message box of some type. And what that means is that we need to create one. So let's right-click on controllers and say Add Controller. Whoops, not here, not in controllers. Hopefully you're yelling at the screen right now. View models, that's better. View models. And I want to have a new class. I'm going to call this the status info view model. I'm going to get public. And I'm going to inherit from screen, which I have to add the using statement for caliber and micro for that. Now, what you may not know is that I am not a great user interface designer. I am horrible at graphics in general. I'm going to create a really simple, bare bones, doesn't look great, but it works message box. Okay? Now, please, 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 if you're going to put it in production, make it look better. Okay, but we're going to do something really simple. So I'm going to create a property string called header and another one called message. And that's typically an error message has like the category of error, something like that, and then it has a message that has the description of what's going on. And so that's what we're going to do. We're kind of mimic that functionality. And then I'll create a public void update message method that takes in a header and it takes in a message. And this is where the actual modification of those properties is going to happen. So header equals header and message equals message. And then I'm going to do a notify of property change, and that's going to be on the header, and then notify of property change on the message. Okay? I'm going to change these right here to be private sets. That way you can't make a change externally to these. I want them to go through this update message method. And the last thing I want to do here is I'm going to have a button on the form that is a close button or acknowledge button of some kind. So public void close sounds good enough to me, and we're going to do try close. And what that does is it closes the existing form, not the whole application, just this form. If you did this dot close, it would close the entire application. We don't want that. We just want this form itself to close when you hit the close button. Okay. Now let's create a view for this status info view model. So add a user control, and this is going to be a status info, make sure the names match up, view. And this is our view, pretty simple. Right now it's just an empty box with nothing in it, so let's put something in it. But again, I'm going to keep it really simple and do a stack panel. I'm not even going to do the grid, just a stack panel with the orientation equals vertical. And then I'm going to have a couple of text blocks inside of it. Text block with the name equal to header. And then let's set the font size to 20. And we're going to make this bold as well. So font weight is bold. That way it's pretty big and bold. And we'll put a margin on here of 10. Again, simple stuff just to have something on the screen. Now let's do it again. In fact, I'll copy and paste this. And this time it's going to be message. And the font size is still 20, but let's take off the bold. The form, so that's fine. I think that's going to be about it. Now we have a message box, a status info view and view model that we can pop up at some point. But that means now we have to figure out how to create a pop-up and how to get a new instance every time you want to do this. Because don't forget, you want to have multiple of these possibly if you have multiple different issues. So it can't just be that you have one copy of this. So let's go back over to our sales view model. This is where you have the exception. And what we're going to do here is let's get a new message box. So var, let's call it MSG equals, and how do you get a new message box? Well, you could pass it in through the constructor, but that's going to create one instance for this form. That's not the end of the world, but it may be that that's not what you want to happen. Let's start there, and then we'll talk about other options. So if you want a status info view model, you do a control dot here to create our field, and now you could say equals so now we've modified that form, but we still need to show the form. Okay, so we've called the modify, and that's going to change our messaging, but now we still need to show it in some way. So now what we need to do is we need to create a dialog box. And for that, we need the window manager. So let's ask for the window manager. So window manager, window, control dot to create our field. And now down here, we can say window dot show dialog. We're not having a lot of settings. There's no settings. There's no context. We're just updating the header and the message and then showing the dialog for that form. Let's try this and see how it looks. Okay, so the form is opening up. I go log in, and it says, now it's got this weird TRM desktop UI.viewModels.status info view model up here, but it says unauthorized access. You do not have permission to interact with the sales form. Now I can't click off it, so I can't go back to this form underneath. I have to hit close. And now I'm back to the form, but of course it's empty. So the next thing I want to do is I want to close this form. So let's close this form once we have successfully shown that dialog box. So try close. Let's just do just that. So incremental little changes to make it a little bit better. You do not have permission, close, and now the form's gone away. There's nothing to replace it with, so it's just kind of sitting here. We can log out, we can exit, and that's it. We really need to have a menu option here for sales information. We have a drop down with, go to sales form. We don't right now, but we don't have permission either, so that's kind of a moot point. So we could log out and then log back in, but then we get this message saying we can't go there, and so now we have to go back to this blank page. But we're making progress. Now let's look at that. Let's go log out and log back in. Right now, I can resize this, make it bigger. I can move it around. And this right here is ugly. So let's change a couple of these things. Let's make it so you can't resize this to make it ugly. And you can't, let's replace this right here with something like, system message or system error or something like that. So let's go back here. And we're going to modify these settings. Now, what are those settings? Well, this is where it gets a little trickier. You have to create basically a dynamic list of settings. So we're going to say dynamic settings equals new expando object. Yes, that is a real thing. Control dot to add using system.dynamic. So create a new expando object. And we're going to say settings dot, notice there's no IntelliSense here because essentially we can create anything we want in this object. So we're going to say settings dot window startup location. Yes, you have to type these out correctly because there is no IntelliSense, and so you have to know what these options are. So I'm going to give you these options because that way you don't have to go looking for them. So window, wow, startup location, control dot to add using system.windows, dot, and we have center owner, center screen, and manual. So now you can choose where you want this to open up. In this case, center owner, which the owner is the person who called it. I also want settings dot resize mode. And that's going to be resize mode dot. You can minimize, you can resize with grip, or no resize. Let's go with no resize. And finally, settings dot title equals, let's go with system error. And that's going to be the title bar. Now that I have those settings, I can pass them in right here. Settings. Let's try this again. I log in. Notice system error. I cannot resize. There's no ability to resize. It starts in the center. I can move it around, but it starts in the center. Okay. That makes it a little cleaner. Now, I had mentioned that if you pass it in like this, then calling it multiple times, you may get, it's gonna be a problem. Okay, so in theory, we could do this and call it again and say duplicate and say this is our second call. So this is our second call. and show this as well. In theory, this would work. Let's try it. Okay, there's our first one. There's our second one. Duplicate call. This is our second call. So that works, but we're reusing the same form. That might not be ideal. Maybe you want to have two of these on the screen at the same time. Now, show dialog makes it kind of difficult because that's actually a blocking call. Notice we didn't do the try close until after the second dialog box was closed. So it is a blocking call. But maybe you want to just show a pop-up, not necessarily a dialog, and you want to have multiple of them. Well, in that case, you couldn't really use one instance of status info view model. Because if you showed one and then showed the next one's settings would overwrite the first one's settings, and it would actually have two of the same messages, and it's the last message you showed. Not ideal. In which case, instead of getting this status info view model from the constructor, which is ideal, what you would do instead is you would say var, let's just say info equals IOC.get status info view model, like so. And that would get a new view model each time. That way you can have multiple copies inside of your one method or one class. So that's an option as well. So let's clean this up a little bit. And remember before I said, let's assume that we know that this is an unauthorized exception? Well, what if it's not? Though you don't want to say you're unauthorized, we want to say something else. So let's do this. Let's control X here and say if ex.message, I'm going to do a quick and dirty compare to, so I'm just going to say message equals unauthorized, like so. Then do this. Now, you could also do a string compare, which would be better. It's going to look at casing, unless you say don't look at casing, but this will work for a quick way of doing this. So you know what's unauthorized is our exception message whenever we have an unauthorized error. So now we could say else and say status message is fatal exception, and say instead of this message we could say ex.message and just show the exception message itself. Okay, that way in which case what we do is we would wrap this right here with a try catch and have a different message box and a different action. Maybe we'd say, hey, you're allowed to view stuff, but you can't check out. And then just leave it, go back to the cart, and don't do anything else. That's a possibility. So there's options here we can play with, but now we have the tools to do so. We also have the tools to show message boxes in other locations. Can we make it prettier? Absolutely. We definitely should. But it does work the way it is right now. All right, so let's go back to our product controller. We're going to control Z to undo. We can't undo. No problem. We can do a cashier. So it was. And now it should be, let's just verify this. With this next task, we have handled what to do if the user doesn't have permission, and we've created a dialog box which we can reuse in multiple different areas in multiple different ways. Now, the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to look at creating a display for the users and their associated groups. So we know, okay, this user has these group accesses. So they're a cashier, or they're an administrator, or they're a manager. And we'll see which ones they have. The video after that, we're actually going to be allowing for some modification of those lists. So we can say, okay, give Tim access to be a cashier. Now, obviously, that'll be a administrator only ability, but that's what's coming down the next 2 videos. And after that is the .NET Core upgrade. Don't forget to go over and get the source code if you're a Patreon member. Until the next video, thanks for watching, and as always, I am Tim Corey.